Ladies and gentlemen, now hosting the RizzoCast, put your hands together for Steven Risotto!
What's going on, everybody, and welcome. My name is Steven Risotto. I cover the San Francisco Giants for SFA, and I'm the host of RizzoCast, a podcast that features current and former big league players, coaches, fans, media, and others who are regarded as some of the brightest minds around the game of baseball. Today's guest is Connor Clark, a sports media and broadcasting student at the University of Lincoln, Nebraska. He's a Cornhusker. I first came across Connor's work in 2016 when I was actually looking for an MLB playoff stream, and I came across his YouTube channel, and he was streaming himself doing play-by-play of the Chicago Cubs playoff games off his television set. He was a freshman in high school then. Now he's calling college basketball, baseball, football, among other sports, and he's worked with a local radio station as well in the area. This episode is all about broadcasting, how Connor got started in the industry, his unique techniques that he uses, working with a full production team, a color analyst, the rhythm of every sport, his distinct voice, so much more coming up next on the RizzoCast. This is episode number 135, and let's get started. All right, and we are here with Connor Clark, and Connor, let's start from the beginning because we were just talking about this, and I remember coming across your YouTube channel in 2016 because I don't know what it was. I don't think I was home at the moment, and I was looking for a stream of the World Series or something, or one of the playoff games in 2016, and I found you, big Cubs fan back in the day. I found your YouTube channel. You were announcing the game off the TV. So I have to start there. How did that kind of start for you to call the games off the TV and do it for the Cubs, a team that you grew up kind of watching?
Yeah, that was, and I know you just mentioned it. We were talking about it right before we got on here, and thinking about that now, that was about 7 years ago at this point. I actually started that up when I was an 8th grader. And now I'm a junior in college. So it's been quite the journey from then to now. But I remember I saw people doing it on YouTube, basically the same thing that I was doing, just calling their favorite team's games off of a TV. And I mean, I was 13, 14 years old. I wasn't too aware of what copyright rules were and just kind of trying to navigate my way around it. And I'm sure many people were. But yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good idea. I'd always played sports when I was younger, but it was just something that I kind of found interesting. And I always knew that I think I wanted to do something in sports with my career. And I wasn't thinking about that too much as an 8th grader, but I was just like, hey, might as well. And obviously the Cubs were really good that year in 2016. They won the World Series in the fall of my freshman year of high school, which was just an absolutely magical summer to watch that team progress from, the late stages of March when they opened up the season in Anaheim to play the Angels all the way up until that Game 7 against Cleveland. I mean, it was super fun to kind of make content about that and just kind of show what I know about not only the team, but just about baseball and give people a sense of what my fandom looked like, because out of all the teams that I root for, and I mean, I've been a basketball guy first my entire life, but the Cubs have always been, that number one team for me out of any sport. And I think they still are to this day, to be honest. It was just kind of a team that my grandma started liking when she was really young, and she was a fan for 72 years when they finally won it. And it's just kind of a thing that everybody in my family is a Cubs fan. It's one sport that we can all kind of rally around as baseball. Obviously, you don't have to be too far into it because there's so many games on over the summer. You just kind of throw it on at a family gathering and, hey, look, the Cubs are playing and stuff like that. So that was a part of it as well. But yeah, to think back on that, I mean, if you had me watch that stuff now, I would tell you it's absolutely terrible. But it's always funny to kind of think back on and how much has changed between then and now, and how much more I guess I know about broadcasting and that whole world as a junior in college now. But yeah, I mean, it was a cool start. maybe got a couple funny looks here and there for doing it, but at the end of the day, I think it was worth it.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on this, but I was going to ask, you started the channel right kind of in the midst of those really, really good Cubs teams. I think they had made the playoffs in 2015. Then you mentioned, winning it in Game 7, in Cleveland on the road. And shout out because Joe Madden has been on this podcast before. Did that make it?
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, now I'm in elite company, so I really have to live up to the hype.
Yeah, real quick on Joe Madden. It all happened weird. So I got one of those spam emails, right? Where it was like, well, Joe Madden has a book he's promoting. And would you want to have him on the podcast? And I thought it was one of those spam emails that I'm on some list for. And then I emailed it back randomly, and I didn't believe it until he popped up in the waiting room on the Zoom call, and it was under iPad. And I was like, okay, well, this is either him or it's not him. They gave me a pre-copy of the book. I read it before, and then there he was sitting outside on his balcony. So you are in elite company.
Wow.
Your I guess
I feel like I should have
childhood
prepared
manager.
more for this now. Jeez.
No, it's not that big of a deal, trust me. But yeah, no, did the Cubs being good, they had a good group there. Did that kind of make it more enjoyable? And I guess the other question I had was, like, what is your family thinking when you're calling games off the TV? I'm sure they're trying to watch as well. Like, were they listening to you? Were they battling to listen to the actual broadcast? I got to get that atmosphere inside the Clark household there.
Yeah, I mean, the Cubs being good at that certain point in time was definitely, I guess, a reason to do it at first. And obviously, I mean, yeah, it was so much fun to, just watch that team. And even the year before, too, in 2015, when they made the wild card game against Pittsburgh and upset the Cardinals in the divisional round. So that was cool. And that was more of a reason to do it. And that obviously made it more enjoyable. I mean, as you know, too, it's more fun to cover a good team than it is a bad team. And I'm saying that if I was at Wrigley Field for every single game. I'm just a young teenager doing it off of the TV. But as far as the parents and the other family members that wanted to watch the game, I'd usually do it. Now, obviously, when the World Series was on, it was a little bit different. Like, we would all watch it together and they would kind of let me do my thing. But, during the season, I would kind of, do it in my room. I had a smaller TV in my room, so I would just kind of do it there by myself and just kind of do what I wanted. And I mean, that was fun too. Every now and then it would be, a live thing, so other people could kind of, drop by and chime in with it, and it would kind of feel like you're watching it with other people while you're doing the game by yourself. So that was cool too. But I mean, yeah, every now and then I'm sure the parents would be like, you know what, maybe you should go do this in a different room. But I'm sure they're much more happy that I'm doing it at an actual legitimate level, I guess now is a good way to put it. But yeah, again, it is still crazy to look back on how much I did 7 years ago, which is the craziest part.
Yeah, and I know broadcasting is, something that a lot of people have aspirations to do. I know whenever I connect with people at a conference or, just sports people in general, they always say they want to be the next Stephen A. Smith, right? Or they want to be on ESPN and everything. And that's obviously the goal for everybody. And there's people that want to be play-by-play announcers, but they always end up, either writing, or they end up on radio, they end up being an anchor. They don't necessarily, focus in, or whether there's an opportunity or not, on play-by-play. So what is it about play-by-play and kind of the art of narrating a game that intrigued you? Because you mentioned that it was something that interested you. Why did it kind of want to make you involved? What was that aspect of the narrating of the game?
A really good question. I think, and still to this day, there's nothing better to me, I think, when you're calling a game and obviously you get that big moment and you just nail it, right? And you listen back to it and you're like, wow, that was really good at the time. So I think that's a part of it. I just really enjoy telling the story of a game, telling a story of a certain player or a certain team or a certain coach. I think that's really cool. It's another layer to the game that, many people may not know about before watching the game. I think that's a big part of it. And then just kind of doing it, I guess. And that was kind of the first thing that I really was drawn to when it comes to sports media and all that. And I mean, writing is cool. I did writing in high school, and I will be doing writing probably this summer again, as well as the play-by-play. But I just think that the play-by-play, I thought it was unique at the time, and I'd always enjoyed, listening to the Joe Bucks, the Jim Nantzes, Len Casper for the Cubs growing up. I mean, that's kind of the voice of my childhood. Len Casper was, and it was a very sad day when he left to go to the White Sox for me. But it's, I think I'm spoiled as well growing up in Chicago, listening to a ton of just great voices through sports. I mean, you got Pat Hughes on the radio side for the Cubs. You got Chuck Swirsky, who's been an incredible mentor for me on the radio side for the Bulls. You have Adam Amin now with the Bulls, who is a big national voice. He's an Illinois guy. And, just the list goes on. And I think I was spoiled in that sense too. So I think that had a little bit to do with it as well. And my dad is a huge sports fan. So we would always, go to sporting events when I grow up or watch, the Sports Center highlight after we got home from, say, a Bulls game or something. So we always enjoyed listening to who was doing the game. We were always kind of curious about that. And, just the more I got into it, the more I figured it out. And kind of the more traction I got with it throughout high school as well. When I did, my high school's football and basketball games, that was a really unique opportunity too, which I was fortunate enough to have with the people there. So I think that really catapulted it as well, because the feedback from the community in that sense was really, really strong. And it was a lot bigger than I thought it was going to be. So that was an even more motivating factor to continue with it. And now doing it here at the collegiate level with Nebraska, where I'm at right now. I mean, we're in the Big Ten. Memorial Stadium is a 90,000 seat stadium. I mean, It's just those kind of things too, as a play-by-play guy, really gets you excited, and the moment and the atmosphere. I think all of those things combined really makes it my favorite by far. And I think it's one of the coolest jobs out there. If you ask me, it is the best job out there, at least in sports.
And when you're doing, even back to the, broadcasting off the TV, and probably even in high school, because, a lot of people are afraid of making mistakes, when they're being a play-by-play announcer or any type of, action behind a microphone. Did you feel like, your prior experience before getting to Nebraska kind of helped you in terms of, okay, I made mistakes, or, I feel comfortable making mistakes because it's going to happen. So did you kind of feel like you were zoned in with the prior experience before you got there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that the experience I had in high school, I think I was lucky with, because we didn't have a program where I went to high school. I went to Lake Forest High School in Illinois. For anybody from Illinois potentially listening to this. And I think that was a big reason, because the reason why I started doing that, and this is the, stupid sob story that I always tell everybody, the reason why I really got into it is because I wanted to play basketball my freshman year of high school. Didn't make the team, but I still wanted to be a part of the program in some way, shape, or form. And then I took the experience from the calling the games off the TV, saying, hey, look, I've kind of have developed an interest for this. Can I maybe do this for basketball to start? And the people there were like, absolutely. And, my new media teacher, we have a new media program there, which is basically a film class where you create movies and all that sort of stuff. A lot of production value there. He was totally in. The school ended up investing in some equipment. So that was really cool. So yeah, I think that totally, the 3.5 years that I did that for was huge going into my freshman year here at Nebraska. And I think a lot of people didn't really have that experience, which is fine too, because a lot of people don't know what they want to do even when they get to college. They're just kind of getting to college, and whatever they find interesting, they'll throw themselves into, and that's totally fine, whatever. So I was ahead in that aspect, and that really set me up for some opportunities my freshman year that I didn't really know that were possible. I was doing Nebraska men's basketball first round of the Big Ten tournament as a freshman in college during the remote COVID year. And we were still on campus, but we'd call the games off of a monitor in our radio station. So, I was doing that. Women's basketball, Big Ten Network Plus is a really good opportunity throughout the Big Ten schools where students can do TV games. I did that as a freshman as well. And those were all opportunities where, like, I was blown away that I was able to do that as a freshman in college. My parents were very blown away that I was able to do that as a freshman in college. And it was all because of that prior experience. And that really kind of gave me a head start. And I wasn't the only one with some sort of experience prior to college. There's a good handful of people with that as well, which is nice because you get to work with them too. So that was just enormous. And that's only gotten me farther, I think, as the years have gone on here at Nebraska, and just have opened more doors and more opportunities. And people have really, if I'm applying for a job, they can see all this prior high school experience that I have. And I know it's just high school, but at the end of the day, it's all about reps when you want to get into play-by-play. So the more you do, the better you're going to get, and people are going to see that. And I think that gave me, one foot in the door, if you will, already going into college. And then when that came to, a job search or an internship search, that has really helped me as well in those areas.
Yeah, and I do want to get back to Big Ten Plus in just a second, but real quick, I'm not going to pass over the opportunity to ask you for your Connor Clark basketball scouting report. I mean, we got to have that.
I mean, for the tournament?
No, you getting cut.
Me?
We got to get your
boy.
player profile, you personally as an athlete. Let's hear it.
Oh, man. Well, I'm not the most athletic guy, and I will be the first to tell you that. So I like to hang out by the three-point line. I may be the most inconsistent three-point shooter you have ever met in your entire life. One night I could score 20 points in an intramural game, and then the other I could go 1 for 20. So that's kind of my player profile. I just like to shoot. If it goes in, it goes in. If it doesn't, well, I'm going to keep chucking, and maybe my teammates will get upset at me for that, but it's all in good fun.
Okay, there we go. I love to see it. Appreciate the honest answer, by the way. And I guess one thing that I was wondering is because, so much of your prior, and I know I keep talking about the, doing the Cubs on the TV, right? But when you watched, do you remember the first time you called an actual baseball game in person or a basketball game in person? Was it different looking with your own eyes and not on a screen of the movements that are happening and the things that are going on, and all of a sudden you see the whole field? Instead, because I remember during the COVID year, all these, MLB broadcasters who were doing games off the monitor, and you had this experience with basketball you just mentioned, they were having a lot of trouble, knowing, because they look at the umpires, for example, on home runs to see if they give the signal, and they couldn't do that anymore because they were looking based off, whatever the cameraman wanted to do and the production team in the truck or whatnot. But so was it different for you when you first got that experience in person to kind of like get a grasp at, wow, a whole, I could see the whole court. I could see the whole field. Was there ever that experience?
Yeah, I think the first game I ever did, and I'll count this as the first game I ever called, was one of our high school basketball games, and I was a freshman. It was, I believe, the December of 2016, I want to say. And I was nervous. I'm just going to be honest. And that was well before I had, the deep voice or whatever, which is something that, I can't control. But I'll be honest, I'm incredibly lucky and blessed to have. So that's gotten me a little bit farther, I think, as well.
Yeah,
but
I saw the clip of you getting complimented on it, by the way. So
yeah, that was, it always comes out of nowhere. And it's probably the most difficult compliment for me to take because I don't know how to take it. It's just like, I didn't do anything to get this. It's just what I have. Right. So it's just kind of one of those things I can't control, but it's a good thing that I can't control. But yeah, I mean, I was nervous, obviously. I mean, it was a big game. Like, I was thrown, and I wanted to do this, but I was thrown into the fire. Like, we were playing Jalen Brunson, guard for the Knicks. We were playing his high school. We were in his conference. It was the year after he graduated, but they still had a couple of D1 players. Justin Smith, if that name rings a bell, he played basketball at Indiana for a number of years, and then Arkansas. He was on that team. So I wanted to do that game because I knew that there were some really, really good players and a lot of history between the two teams. And I knew all of that, but I didn't really understand the preparation that goes into a game doing that first one. Obviously, you throw the atmosphere into it. You mentioned looking at referees or umpires for calls. I mean, that was a whole nother layer that was thrown into that. And then I had somebody doing it with me. I'd never done that before. So working in a color analyst and my first game ever was a teacher. I did it with a fellow student for the next 3 years, which was really, really fun because we developed awesome chemistry throughout those 3 years in the booth. But I mean, it was just so many, when you're doing a game on TV by yourself for a YouTube thing, it's so much different. And then you throw all these external factors into a game, and it's just like, it's overwhelming, to be honest, in your first game. And it should be, because, you know, that's just kind of the environment of a sporting event. Now, obviously, I've been to sporting events as a fan, so you don't really think about all that other stuff when you're there because you're contributing to the environment as a fan. And going back to the high school stuff, kind of preparing me better for college, I remember the first in-person basketball game I did was December 19th of my sophomore year, which was 2021, against Kansas State. They came to town, and we're lucky here at Nebraska. We have Pinnacle Bank Arena. It's a 15,500 seat pro level, I would say, arena. It's top of the line. And here I am in this huge basketball arena that I've never called a basketball game in before. I wasn't nervous, though, however, before it, because of that prior experience. All right, yes, it's a bigger level, but at the end of the day, it's just basketball, right? So I think that's the biggest thing. Once you get a couple games under your belt and the environment, you're used to it, and even whether that's high school, middle school, college, whatever, once you get acclimated to that, at the end of the day, it's just whatever sport you're calling. It's just basketball. It's just baseball. Go in with what you know. If you're prepared well enough, you won't be nervous and you'll be confident in what you do. And again, I think I attribute a lot of that to the experiences that I got in my time in high school and being thrown into the fire, even though it was remotely my freshman year of college.
And we hear so many play-by-play broadcasters call a big moment and then they get out of the way, right? Are you able at this point, have you learned to kind of grasp like a big moment, kind of, I guess, identify a big moment when you see one? Like, a guy has a big swing, go ahead homer or something late in the game, and you're like, okay, this is a big swing. This is where I back off. Or, late, basketball, there's so much going on all the time. There's guys moving all over the place. Are you able at this point to kind of identify a big moment? Or maybe that was just the sports fan in you. Maybe it's not even a broadcasting thing, or is it?
I think it's a little bit of both, depending on what the moment is. And that's something that I'm still trying to get better at. And there's a lot of things that I'm still trying to get better at. But identifying the moment, I think I can do that. But delivering it, obviously, is the most important part, right? And once you know that you're done with your call, get out of the way. With basketball, with all the games that I did this year, they were honestly essentially blowouts. There were a couple of games that I was on color for, and obviously it got out of the way for the big moments in there. For instance, I was on color for the Nebraska-Purdue game in early December, and Nebraska took them to overtime, and Purdue's number 4 in the country. I mean, the place was absolutely rocking. They were down 14, and they came all the way back, forced overtime. There were some big moments in that game. So, I mean, as a color analyst, which is something I normally don't do, but I'll step in if needed. I can get out of the way there. I think I learned that over this summer as well with my first season in professional baseball. You kind of identify when a big swing is going to happen. And even if it's on radio, you let it breathe, let the crowd tell the story for a little bit, and then go into the details of a home run. Say X player has 7 home runs on the year now and X amount of RBIs, and here's the score, and this is the situation now. The biggest challenge, I think, too, when I faced this earlier this year, and I've done TV basketball games before here in college, but I did one earlier this year for our women's team. And during a break, I turned to my color analyst, who was a senior at the time. He graduated early over the winter break. And I told him, I'm like, this is so hard, because I'm a radio guy first. At least that's what I have been in college. It is so hard not to just, let it rip when you're on TV, because you got to let the picture tell the story, right? But I'm so acclimated to painting the picture with my voice. It's just like, okay, when do I say this? When do I not say anything? And so I think that's a bigger challenge, honestly, for me, is that transition from radio to TV, and that balance of, you want to describe things, but obviously the audience can still see. You don't want to over describe what the people are seeing, but obviously on radio, that's exactly what you want to do.
Yeah. Like on TV, you could probably get away with saying, and a fly ball to left, 2 outs. And then on radio, you got to go fly ball to left, back into his right is, blah, 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 so there's a lot more there. I guess why Lincoln for you? Why was Lincoln, being a Cornhusker? Why was that appealing? What was it about their broadcasting program that kind of made you choose them for college?
I think this is the question that I've gotten the most ever since coming to college here in Nebraska, because I grew up in Chicago, major market for sports. Obviously, you have fantastic universities in the state of Illinois, Northwestern being one of them, with the Medill School there, and I know a good bunch of people that go there, and obviously their journalism school is second to none. But I went on my first college visit, which was here to Nebraska, my sophomore year of high school, because my dad and I wanted to get out early. It was more so my dad wanted to get out early and seeing schools and like, hey, we should do this. I'm like, whatever. So we did Nebraska, Kansas State, who also is a pretty solid journalism program. I consider them heavily. And then Kansas, who doesn't really have journalism, but it was on the way. So we're like, why not? Why not try it? And when we got to Lincoln, I mean, everybody, and this is such cliche thing, everybody thinks it's in the middle of nowhere, which if you go outside, yeah, but the city itself of Lincoln is extremely surprising for somebody who'd never been to Lincoln before, or the state of Nebraska. Very surprising. It's about 270,000 people. I mean, obviously the fan base for Nebraska athletics is really appealing for somebody like me who came in as a big sports fan. It was like, I want to be a part of that, because to be honest, it's something in collegiate sports I'd never really had. I mean, I had relatives who went to Northwestern. Their fan turnouts never been great up until this year with basketball, and obviously the one tournament year. And then both my parents went to DePaul in Chicago, and I mean, they've been terrible at basketball ever since I was born in 2003. I'm still a diehard, but they keep bringing me back somehow, but I don't know how, but that was appealing to me. And then the journalism school is small. I mean, the whole university is about 20,000 people undergrad, but the journalism school is about 1,600 of that 20,000. So it's smaller. So I viewed it as, hey, there's less people, probably means more opportunity. So, and I think I was right on that. And their biggest saying here is do from day one. And that's something that they really embody. And that's something that I was able to take advantage of, was the do from day one mentality. And they give a lot of underclass, a lot of freshmen like I was, really great opportunities to call high level collegiate sports in the Big Ten. And that's something you can't really get a lot of places. I mean, I visited Kansas State, and Kansas State was great, but you'd have to wait probably a year or two to get into that. I visited Arizona State. That's like the upper echelon of journalism, sports media schools, with the Cronkite schools, and there's 20,000 kids alone in that journalism school. There's 70,000 kids at Arizona State. And yeah, that's in Phoenix, but it was a little kind of overwhelming. And I was like, well, I'm probably going to have to wait 2.5, 3 years maybe to even get my shot in the booth. And if I get my shot in the booth, it could be only one time. So that was like, I don't know if I want to do that. So the less people, more opportunity, and the do from day one aspects were big for me. And then you mix that in with a fan base for Nebraska athletics. I mean, you don't need to be told about the Nebraska football sellout streak. Every Nebraska fan will let you know about it without asking. But that's a big thing here. The atmosphere at Memorial Stadium is absolutely second to none when it comes to a college football environment. This year with basketball, especially down the stretch in February, the team went 6-2 in the month, and they got to 500, which was not really, expected out of this Fred Hoiberg group. And there was a huge buzz around them towards the end of the season. So as a sports fan, that's really, really cool. And then as a journalism guy and a play-by-play guy, the opportunities that are here, although it may not be a major market, which, is the ultimate goal one day, it's still a great starting point. And I've been, overwhelmed with the amount of opportunity that I've been able to get here in Lincoln. So those are the main reasons why I chose to go from, a city of 2.5 million to a city of about 250,000.
So there's nothing Jay Adonde could have done to get you to Northwestern.
Well, I mean, my ACT score had something to say about that as well. I wish I had the numbers to get in there, but I would probably consider, if not have gone there, if I had the numbers to get in there. But yeah, their school is great. And I've been able to meet some people who go to school there, whether I went to high school with them or have met them in the minor league baseball system now. I mean, they're interning in the same league that I work in. So, I mean, that's been really cool as well.
Yeah, they're all over the place, no doubt about it. And let's get back to Big Ten Plus, because that's one of the opportunities you've had with the school, is that, you know, they have a student produced network partnered with Big Ten. Now, you know, you have a full on production that is as close to professional, the professional scale as possible, right? I mean, with the extra resources, did you feel like there was extra responsibility? You know, did that ever come into play with all the extra stuff that the Big Ten network kind of supplied?
I mean, I don't know if I would have thought of extra responsibility because, I mean, Big Ten Plus, you have the student radio station here, which obviously you want to get everybody involved, right?
Mm.
And everybody opportunities. And then the Big Ten Plus, yes, you want to get as many people involved with that as well. But at least here at Nebraska, it's a little bit more selective, just based on, you know, the work you've done in the past, and what you can bring to the table. And obviously the people who run Big Ten Plus are going to be the final judge of that as well. But I wouldn't say I felt, you know, a more of a responsibility because I was brought into that to do what I have been doing. Now, obviously I've progressed ever since I started doing that. I mean, my stuff now is probably way better than my stuff freshman year. And that's how it's supposed to be. I mean, you're supposed to improve with each and every one. So I wouldn't say an extra responsibility, but it's definitely a huge opportunity as well with the TV, with basketball, with baseball, with softball. I mean, it's been awesome. And you mentioned it's a totally student run thing. And I mean, I'm trying to remove all bias here, but I think Nebraska has the best Big Ten Plus production as a whole in the conference. And I would make a strong argument for that. I mean, I've done a couple of TV baseball games over the past couple of weeks here over at Haymarket Park, which is where the Nebraska baseball team plays. And I mean, it looks like a regular Big Ten Network broadcast. I mean, they do an absolutely fantastic job. And that makes my job so much easier because, you know, they know how to paint the picture extremely well, and they know what graphics to put up and what stats to put up. And the communication between producer and talent is really, really good. Hey, we want to talk about this coming into the bottom of the fifth inning, or Bryce Matthews has, you know, a cycle watch. He's 3 for 3 or something like that. I mean, they're absolutely fantastic at that. And the quality of it is really, really good. So, I mean, us announcers, we only do so much on TV, but I think our group of student run, you know, producers and all those guys back in the production side of things, I mean, they're awesome. And I think honestly that we may have the best group in the Big Ten.
It's almost like you climbed through your TV screen from 7 years ago, and then you got all these graphics and the TV network stuff. It's pretty awesome. And you mentioned earlier the color analyst that's with you, and they're obviously part of the broadcast team as well. What is the conversation like with, you know, maybe a new partner beforehand to prepare? And like, is it a priority for you to kind of give them space to drop insight? Because I know there has to be a certain flow to it.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely make sure that they have room to get in, especially in a radio basketball game. I think is the best example because that's probably the fastest sport that I call. And yeah, you got to find your spots to, you know, be quiet and let the color analysts, you know, do their thing. And the conversations I have with my color analyst before a game isn't too extensive. I mean, we go over what we want to do in the open. Usually, you know, I set the scene and then I tee them up for a point about each team that's in the game. And then we kind of, you know, go back and forth from there if we have extra time in the open. And I prefer to do things more unscripted rather than scripted just because it sounds more genuine and more real. Not that scripting is bad or anything. That's just kind of how I do it. But yeah, I mean, once, you know, it's kind of like what we said earlier, you just save it for the podcast, right? Save it for the game. Like if you have good points, and yeah, we'll go over stats. And I mean, a perfect example, I mean, we were doing a baseball game last Tuesday, I believe, and it was on TV, and my color guy brought up a fantastic stat about the Huskers in the second inning. They've outscored their opponents 20-8 in their last 5 games in the second inning. I'm like, great. I'm going to make sure that you use that. I'm going to give you a spot to use that in. So, I mean, that communication is obviously really important. But at the same time, I'd like to, save it for the air and let's get into this on the air. And one of my professors, and he's actually a guest on the radio show that I worked for. I knew him before he became a professor here. He just became a professor here last year, or actually this year. And his saying is, what are you going to do when it's 12-2 in the fifth inning? I mean, what are you going to talk about? So you always have to be prepared in that sense too. And that goes hand in hand with being prepared with your color analyst. I mean, you guys got to keep the audience compelled. So how are you going to do that? And that's a big part of it.
All right, so you'll be calling games for the Lincoln Salt Dogs of the American Association. Once again, you did it last season. How did that opportunity kind of come about to call some American Association baseball?
A very important email conversation. So to put it simply, I was kind of looking around for internship opportunities, and I don't know if you've ever heard of the Northwoods League, but that's like a collegiate wooden bat summer league. And there's a ton of teams around where I grew up in the northern suburbs of Chicago. So I looked at that. None of them really had a play-by-play opportunity listed, and that was a big learning point too, because a lot of these jobs, play-by-play wise, are kind of word to mouth. Like you're not going to find them. Yeah. Like you'll find some on, STAA or Teamwork Online. But a lot of it is just who you know and who you've talked to. So that's kind of how that opportunity came about. I emailed Michael Dixon, who is the #1 play-by-play voice for the Lincoln Salt Dogs. This will be his 5th season upcoming. He's a grad of the University of Nebraska of 2013, I want to say 2013 or 14. So I emailed him and I'm like, hey, is this something that's possible? Because I've looked at you guys and you're offering a social media internship, but I want to get into play-by-play. That's kind of what I've been doing. And if you guys could allow me to do that, I mean, that would be awesome. And I mean, he seemed pretty keen to the idea. He called up the general manager, who's now the president, Charlie Meyer. And they brought me in for a formal interview in there along with the rest of the interns. And it was a 1-by-1 interview process, but I was a part of the interview process for the interns specifically. And they liked what I had to say in the interview, and they liked what I brought to the table on my resume. So I was brought on as my official title was social media / broadcasting intern. So I still worked with 2 other social media interns, which was a really fun time, and came up with different ideas. And I was kind of more on the back end of that. I was more so on the media relations side at the end of the day, helping out with game programs and stat packs, what have you. And then I would do 4 innings a game for 50 home games, which was awesome experience, just a lot of games. And baseball is a grind. There's no doubt about that. But if you really like it, it is a fun time. And I mean, that's the most fun I think I've ever had calling baseball before, just because you're working with the same people every game and the league after you've seen a couple of teams once or twice. So luckily I was able to have an opportunity again with them this year. Trust me, that was not the only team I reached out to. There were probably 150 emails sent out over this offseason to affiliated squads, just kind of seeing if I could poke my way in there or where I stand amongst the crowd. But that's kind of how that opportunity came up.
I think I wrote something at one point about when I was writing something about a local junior college in the area. They were playing in the Northwoods League, which is also a collegiate summer team in Duluth, Minnesota. So that was the team that I think I wrote about, but maybe a little bit different. That's a little bit more up north. But Connor, we can't sign off here without bringing up your near and dear Chicago Cubs. And they made some moves this offseason. They bring in Dansby Swanson, Cody Bellinger, Jameson Taillon. What do you kind of foresee for them in 2023?
Yeah, I'm actually pretty excited for the Cubs this year. I think this is the most excited I've been for the Cubs in a couple of years. I mean, obviously you mentioned Swanson, big acquisition. Cody Bellinger is a name. We'll see how he can, put it together on the field. Obviously, he's struggled the past couple of years ever since winning the NL MVP with the Dodgers. But, I mean, he's still young, which is good, and he kind of brings a fresh bat into the lineup. You bring back guys such as Ian Happ and Nico Hoerner. I think the lineup 1 through 9 is intriguing. And I don't know. I don't want to say they'll make the playoffs this year, but I think they're going to be in a race for that second spot in the wild card and in the NL Central with the Brewers. I really do. And the Brewers kind of underachieved last year. I think a lot of baseball fans could agree with that. I mean, we'll see how Christian Yelich bounces back. I mean, we all know what he's capable of. So that's kind of a big red flag. The loss of Contreras hurts just because of his bat. Obviously, defensively, people didn't think he was that great. But Tucker Barnhart's a phenomenal replacement, I think, for him. I mean, his time with the Reds was really, really good. So that's obviously not, maybe Wilson Contreras level, but it's still a solid replacement for him. So it'll be an interesting Cub team to watch. I think they'll keep, at least I hope they'll keep the North Side, pretty excited for the most of the season. I mean, I'm excited. Opening day as we record this is 10 days away now. So yeah, I mean, this is the most excited I've been in a couple of years for Cub baseball. Really looking forward to their opening day series against the Brewers. I won't get into how I feel about the Brewers, but one of those division rivals. But yeah, I think they can, maybe turn some heads. And if they don't make the playoffs, I think they'll be close. And they'll have, a bright future heading into the following season as well.
And I'm sure a lot of Cubs fans were not pleased to hear the comments that Wilson Contreras made about putting on the Cardinal uniform. I mean, it sounded like, there's a few separate interviews. It wasn't just one interview. There's a few separate interviews where he was like, this feels better. This is where I'm meant to be. And I get it, free agent signing with a new team, but that probably had to hurt a little bit. And I saw a tweet that you just tweeted out about Tim Anderson, and you brought up kind of Len Casper going to the South Side too. Is it really a big disdain for the White Sox among Cubs fans? Like, is that really like a competitive rivalry? I didn't realize it was like that. I know geographically it is, but do Cubs fans really dislike the White Sox? And does it work the other way around, I guess?
I think White Sox fans dislike Cubs fans way more than Cubs fans dislike White Sox fans, but that is causing me to dislike the White Sox more now. I mean, they've never been my most hated team. I've never liked the White Sox, obviously. I've grown up a Cubs fan since the day I was born, and the Cardinals and the Brewers are kind of at the top of your list because you see them the most. And, things get heated there. Cubs-Cardinals, historic rivalry. Cubs-Brewers is kind of a newer to the scene rivalry ever since about 2015. But I think this past season, too, it was a lot of the White Sox didn't live up to expectations, obviously. And the whole Tony La Russa thing was just an absolute disaster. And I think they took out a lot of their frustration, at least in my experience. They took a lot of their frustration out on the Cubs because they were bad. But all of us Cubs fans were like, hey, we knew we were supposed to be bad here. The White Sox, they were supposed to be a World Series contender, and they're not even going to make the field. So I think that was the biggest argument for me against the White Sox fans. They're still not at the top of my list for the teams I dislike. This might be a hot take. I think the Brewers are honestly at the top of the list for me right now. But the whole Wilson Contreras thing could change that, which pains me because he was my favorite Cub for a while. But yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of growing back to where it was. I think it was pretty heated at some point. And then, the Cubs obviously got into the World Series year and kind of that window, and the White Sox were, I guess, rebuilding for lack of a better term. So I think it's starting to ramp up. I do, honestly, though, I do want the Cubs and the White Sox to be good at the same time, because I think that would just be good for baseball, period. And obviously really good for the city. I think it'd be really fun to watch.
Yeah, and I know they broke a drought in 2005, but let's be honest, nobody remembers that World Series. I mean, there's no moment. Like Scott Pasednik, get out of here with that. I mean, there's nothing to fall back on. There's like no footage. Like, we forget that Houston was the other team in that. I mean, I don't know. It's kind of like the Giants and the A's. It's similar because the A's, they think that there's a rivalry. I think a lot of it's marketing. I mean, when you're at Oracle Park in San Francisco, you could see the Coliseum from across the bay. You could see it. The lights are on. And, there's one game where the A's said, we're going to all come in kayaks and we're going to stash McCovey Cove and we're going to take it over. And there was like one kayak that showed up in this whole takeover thing. And it's just like the geographic rivalries are just kind of, you could do with or without them, but they're fun in a lot of respects. But yeah, I mean, very interesting stuff there with the Cubs and White Sox. Connor, man, I appreciate you coming on. This was a blast spending some time with you and getting to kind of pick your brain about the broadcasting world. So thanks for coming on.
Thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure, and I'm glad we could, culminate, what is it now, 4 years of Twitter messages into this podcast. So thanks so much.
Yeah, I have not forgotten the time when you called the Dexter Fowler leadoff home run in Game 7 of the World Series. And then everybody, of course, could go follow Connor on Twitter. He's at C_Clark_27. He's going to be doing a good job for the Cornhuskers here. And of course, this summer with the Salt Dogs, which is an A+ name, by the way. So go check out his stuff. And then, of course, the podcast is RizzoCast. Go check it out. Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you find your podcasts. And on Twitter and Instagram at RizzoCast. Go check it out. And see you next time.